introductory comments. The legacy issues, coronial process, Chief Constable, the issue of the coronial inquest and the provision of material has been the focus of questions and discussions for some time now, and indeed with some discussion upstairs and there are some further questions today. You are aware of the board member concerns around this and about the damage this issue has on the confidence in the community in respect of policing. We do acknowledge that it's a very complex area of work and a legalistic one, but the board does need to be satisfied around the effectiveness of process and approach in respect of disclosure for legacy inquests. The board has agreed to ask the Justice Minister to commission an independent review of the PSNI's disclosure process for legacy inquests, and we hope that it will provide clarity and public assurance around issues relating to redactions, resources and the prioritisation of cases. With regard to the PSNI budgets, you have presented the board with the final budget plans for 2015-16 and illustrative resource requirements for the next 3 years through to 2018-19. Achieving a balanced budget has been possible with the additional 20 million allocation for policing, but we are aware that pressures are still faced and further discussions on resources will be required for subsequent periods, or indeed further discussions on resources required. The board has approved the plans for the year ahead, but there are still many pressures facing the service and operational challenges have to be met. The board will be keeping the budget under review through the scrutiny of its resources committee, but will also be continuing discussions with you around service resilience beyond 15-16, as we know that further cuts to the policing budget are likely and there will be a need to revisit resourcing. On a more positive budgetary issue, I'm pleased that the PSNI has provided the necessary funding to allow the new radar centre to open later this year. Partnership committee members held a recent meeting there and were very impressed with the life skills learning it will provide for up to 26,000 young people every year. The policing plan discussions have almost been completed, or have been completed in fact, and at next month's meeting we will be using the public session for a presentation and a discussion around targets and measures for the year ahead. This is a key area of work and we want to outline service delivery plans for the year ahead and what can be expected by the public, and also in the light of the restructuring, what changes have had to be made. And last but by no means least, we have to say goodbye to ACC Finlay. This is your last meeting and we will try to go easy on you today. But can I, on behalf of the board, record our appreciation for your work over the last number of years. You've served in a number of key roles during your tenure with us, but undoubtedly I think your Carlsberg moment was with the G8 Summit. So our best wishes for the future. Thank you for all of your hard work and we wish you and your family well for your new life in Scotland. And without any further comments, Councillor, can I hand over to you?
Thank you, Chair, and I too would like to start where you finished off by expressing publicly my sincere thanks to Alistair Finlay, both on my own behalf and on behalf of the team. Alistair will leave the Police Service of Northern Ireland towards the end of the month for a new role as Deputy Chief Executive of the Criminal Injuries Compensation Agency in Scotland. And during his time here, as you said, he's held a number of very challenging roles and held it very competently, including a significant period as the temporary Deputy Chief Constable, where he helped me settle into the role of Chief Constable, and I'm grateful to him for that. For me, Alistair has epitomised everything that we've been trying to achieve in this journey of policing. He is the epitome of the policing with the community ethos that we're trying to spread right across the organisation and how we do service delivery. So we wish you well for the future, Alistair, and thank you for your contribution here in Northern Ireland. Chair, you've mentioned as well finance and resources, and we've already spent some time this afternoon in the private session discussing the medium-term resource plan. And while we are confident now that we can balance a budget for this year that we're about to embark upon, 2015-16, this has only been possible by making decisions that will have a significant operational impact both next year and indeed into the years ahead. I need to be upfront about that. And as I've outlined in my formal report to the board, The greatest operational impact will be felt in terms of reduced recruitment plans, leading to reducing officer numbers and indeed police staff numbers as well. Affordability constraints in this year limited the recruitment of staff and officers into the organisation, so the actual numbers that we have today are already below target, and the issue will continue into the next financial year and beyond. PSNI is becoming a smaller organisation, losing more people each year than we can afford to replace. And while leaver rates are inherently difficult to predict, we have actually more than 1,000 officers approaching a stage where they are eligible to retire from the police service. With high numbers of officers retiring and very limited scope for recruitment next year, it's anticipated that officer numbers will be around 6,770 by April 2016. So that's more than 200 below what we have agreed between the board and the service is actually required. That presents a challenge for us. The impact of reductions in police officer and police staff numbers will be exacerbated by a significant reduction in the overtime budget. Projected core police overtime budgets next year have been reduced by 6.2 million. This equates to over 300,000 hours of less policing on the streets. As you know, a formal funding bid for any period beyond 2015-16 is yet to be commissioned by the Executive. However, it is clear from our illustrative projections in the medium-term resource plan that even if we assume a flat budget, there will be very significant budget gaps in the years ahead. While PSNI will continue to drive efficiency through a process of both transactional and transformational changes, the projections present serious concerns for me, both as accounting officer for the organisation and in my role as Chief Constable. Chair, this is an incredibly challenging picture that we are presented with. The work that we do with the board over the next few months will be of critical importance, not only in producing a bid for the next CSR period, but on how we recalibrate to deliver a policing service with a significantly smaller organisation. These will be challenging conversations, and I have no doubt that more difficult choices lie ahead, because while the budgets and the human resources in the organisation are shrinking, the demand to which we respond is increasing. As I've outlined in the formal report to the board, the scale and scope of the demands to which we respond are almost impossible to communicate. A recent analysis shows that on an average day in the police service, we respond to over 1,300 calls for service from the public. That includes 166 incidents of antisocial behaviour. It includes the reporting of over 280 crimes every day. Of these calls for service, 24 incidents will involve people with mental health issues, and 26 will involve dealing with missing persons, every one of which is a life at risk from our perspective. We make 92 arrests every day. We search 89 people. We prepare 125 prosecution files, and each day we seize 25 to 27,000 pounds worth of drugs. We issue 76 motoring fixed penalty notices or discretionary disposals, and respond to 26 road traffic collisions every day. 2 of those road traffic collisions normally involve death or serious injury. That's trying to paint a picture of the demand that we're facing that is not decreasing, while budgets and resources are facing significant cuts. This snapshot tells us only part of the story in 24 hours of a policing day in Northern Ireland. It does not reflect much of the ongoing investigative, preventative or protective work that we do. For example, murder investigations or other serious crime investigations. It doesn't mention the management of registered sex offenders, for example, or the increasing complexity and volume of dealing with child sexual exploitation or domestic abuse. So as a police service, there is an expectation that we will deal with all of this stuff, everything from abandoned vehicles to intervening and trying to disrupt international criminal gangs involved in human trafficking, and yet the budget is ever reducing. I'm absolutely clear that our job is to keep people safe by policing with the community. That will not change, but we are going to have to prioritise our finite resources to an extent that we have not done before. And actually the European Convention on Human Rights, that we as a command team take seriously, Section 32 of the Police Act will guide us in how we make these difficult decisions. We will be protecting people, we will be preventing harm, and we will be detecting offenders. That is our job in keeping people safe. The accountability mechanisms provided by the board and the role of the PCSPs in the months and years ahead is critically important as we try to deliver this service with less money and resources. There is no doubt that the way in which we deliver some of our services to the community will need to change. But please do not be mistaken in anything that I'm saying. Criminals should not rest easy just because of these changes and challenges in policing. We will continue to deliver on our duties to protect people, to prevent crime, and to bring offenders to justice. That's happening every day in Northern Ireland. A clear example since we last met at the public meeting of the board last month was the arrest of a man who had escaped from prison in Dublin after stabbing 2 prison officers in hospital. This was an excellent example of policing, with local officers identifying the individual because of their investigations of reports of 2 armed robberies. The officers observed the subject until the armed response unit arrived. The suspect, who had a violent history, was armed with a knife. He was detained using a taser device after he had begun to harm himself. I'm immensely proud of the officers who demonstrated clarity of thought and kept the public and indeed the suspect safe in those circumstances. Keeping people safe by policing with the community has not just been about responding to crime and dynamic scenarios like that, but it was also demonstrated in the search for the body of Kieran McAree, the young man who went missing before Christmas on the 17th of December last year from Emmyvale in County Monaghan. For every day over a period of 9 weeks, the police officers from PSNI, along with their colleagues in Garda Síochána, worked in close partnership with the community and voluntary sector to search for the young man's body and bring some relief to the family's grief. PSNI officers from Enniskillen were invited to form a guard of honour at Kieran's funeral. Both of these operational examples, Chair, displayed policing with the community and indeed the community participating in policing, which is what Patton envisaged, and that's what I and this senior team are absolutely committed to. I want to just mention briefly before I conclude the legacy issues. This has been the subject of much discussion between us and the board, in the media, in the coroner's court and in the public interest generally. We've had many discussions in recent weeks on the issue of legacy inquests and disclosure, and I welcome the board's recommendation of an independent review, and I look forward to discussing what that might look like. Delay has been a chronic failure of the inquest process and is having a corrosive effect on public confidence in policing today. I would hope that this review will go some way in assisting us to face that challenge, to deal with that challenge. However, the review will only examine PSNI's processes, and from my perspective it is therefore important that there is absolute clarity about PSNI's role within what is a much broader set of arrangements for legacy inquests. These are arrangements which the Lord Chief Justice himself has observed recently are not working. The full machinery of legacy inquests needs review. Within the current arrangements, the police service seeks to work collaboratively with the coroner, proposing Article 2 and Article 8 redactions for his consideration. We only make proposals, but this is a resource intensive, it's an onerous task, and it's one that we carry out in support of the coroner. We carry this out in support of the coroner, who bears responsibility for ensuring that there is no breach or unnecessary engagement of the European Convention on Human Rights. The coroner, having had full sight of all of the documentation in unredacted form. He has the final say on what redactions are eventually made. There are currently up to 60 legacy inquests involving hundreds of thousands of pages of documentation, all of which the coroner will have full sight of. To date, the coroner has not provided any direction on prioritising his workload, or indeed the workload that then falls to us as a result of these 60 cases. PSNI staff therefore jump from one inquest to the next as the coroner directs, without being able to make consistent progress on any one case. Were the coroner to prioritise and schedule a number of inquests, it would allow the PSNI to deploy its staff with a greater degree of efficiency, thereby reducing the current delay and dealing more appropriately and actually more honestly with the family's expectations. Unless alternative solutions are found, my very real fear is that delays will increase as the coronial inquest workload increases and the impact of the budget cuts continue to take their effect. I understand the executive will be taking appropriate steps to improve the legacy inquest function, and I welcome that. They will have my full support in finding a longer term solution to this issue. I understand, Chair, that there are a number of questions on this issue and other related issues, and I'm happy to hand back to you to facilitate those questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chief Constable. And I think we'll move straight into the questions on the legacy issues, since that's your finishing point. And we have two people who wish to ask, Jerry Kelly and Garrod. So we start with you, Jerry.
Thank you, Chief Constable, for that remarks. And you did mention the families and number of occasions being centre to this, and I want the answers. There's expectations from families, and you said at the end that the delays would increase. I suppose there's a couple of aspects to this. There was an article in the Belfast Telegraph of last week which actually says not that they would increase, but reports a coroner as saying in the case of Seamus Dillon's death that inquest might halt, and indeed other inquests might halt. So could you give us some remarks on that? And also if there is an update, because Sean Brown's case has been a case which has been in the media for a considerable period of time, and which has been at the core of the discussions we've all been having around this, if there's any update on that as well.
Okay, well, I suppose I'd refer back by way of introduction to just my earlier comments. Both of the cases that you mentioned present challenges for us. Police need to be absolutely on top of our game around the disclosure responsibilities that we have. We're working hard at that. The board will be aware that at the end of December we terminated the contract of 327 temporary workers. A significant proportion of them were working in this field. We have recruited a smaller number of permanent members of staff into some of the roles that are seeking to support the coroner and to act as agents of the coroner's court in all of this. But we are a small cog in the big machine of coronial inquests, and I refer back to my earlier comments about it's almost impossible to be jumping between 60 historical, complex, controversial inquests at one time, depending on which one we're going to ask about. So there is a need for us to have some scheduling and prioritisation with the coroner. I've sought that, and he feels unable to meet me to discuss systems, process and prioritisation mechanisms. Clearly I wouldn't want to, and nor would he permit me to discuss any individual cases, but there is something about how we work together in the system to make it more organised, more prioritised, and that the work is scheduled so that work is actually getting started, done properly and brought to completion so that the inquest can move on. But on the Belfast article, the Belfast Telegraph article and the two cases that you mentioned, maybe ask Will Kerr to comment firstly on the Belfast Telegraph article, and then the Deputy Chief Constable could comment on the Sean Brown case as he has more intimate knowledge of that.
I can give you a relatively short answer to your question in respect of the inquest. We have nothing to suggest that the inquest process will stop, as is inferred in the article. There certainly, as the Chief has alluded to, coronial process is an inquisitorial process. We assist the coroner and act as officers of the court, the coronial court. But the issue would remain that the demands of up to 60 inquests, a significant number of which may be run concurrently, and all the demands of disclosure, redaction, and the very labour-intensive process of looking at what may be tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of documents, takes time. And they're all going through a choke point of a finite number of resources, both of the coroner and the coronial court system and of the PSNI. And we also have a number of very significant Article 2 obligations today and a number of ongoing murder and other serious crime investigations. So there's always going to be that challenge between the two. But there's nothing to indicate that any of the inquests will stop. And I know the Deputy's going to make a brief comment about Sean Bryan because we're seeing some sign of that improving.
Well, just before you go on, I mean, I understand what you're saying, and of course there isn't just the PSNI which is involved in this process, and we've discussed the issue of redaction and all the rest of it, but I suppose what families want to know is, what does that mean? And I'm glad to hear you saying that it's not going to stop. What type of delays are they looking at? I mean, I presume that all of these cases, you're talking about 60 cases, if they're being done in tandem, do not all come out the other end of that process at the same time. So it's some comfort to the families, I think, which we're looking for. What sort of delays are we talking about?
Well, I absolutely get the point about families being central to this process. It's impossible to give definitive answers, Jerry, because a lot of it depends on the process that the Chief just outlined, the process of redaction, the amount of documents that are passed with our recommendations about Article 2 and Article 8 redactions to the coroner, who has unredacted access to all the documentation and all the information and ultimately decides on how that information is going to be used. In relation to the Sean Bryan case, the Deputy can add some comments on that might provide some clarity about progress, and there has been some very recent progress in that case.
Well, maybe even just in respect of overall inquests, we have reported previously that in respect of inquests we have completed our work in respect of 5, and there may be other agencies involved who have yet to complete their work, but as far as the PSNI is involved, our work with the coroner is completed. In respect of the inquest touching upon the death of Sean Bryan, we reported in question 4 that we felt there were still 3 to 4 weeks left of our work, but that work has now been completed. So the files that we received back on the 9th of February with queries raised by counsel to the coroner have all been answered, and those now go back to the coroner for the coroner's direction in respect of those 34 folders of material. So we've achieved that considerably advance of the timescale under which we thought that would happen, and in part our resources have been able to focus on this as there's been fewer preliminary inquiries over the last number of weeks, and we've been able to really concentrate on this inquest and move those folders on. So hopefully that is some positive news to the family and others involved in this.
Could I just ask, is the Sean Bryan case one of the 5, or is it plus 5?
No, that's another case, and now it's really, this is now the coroner's office in terms of scheduling the actual inquest, but that would still be some months off because the actual physical redaction of the papers has yet to happen.
Go ahead.
Well, it's just a follow-up to that, George. The Performance Committee asked the question about the LSU and how many people were being recruited. And I think I heard you mention that there was 20 new people, and that the amount of training and processes would be involved would take 2 or 3 months before those people would be operational. I wanted to ask just how many people are in the Legacy Support Unit in total. I'm aware in answer to another question that 4 of the people recruited were former LSU, and 1 was out of C2, I think, or C3. So I presume that length of training for those people wouldn't be the same.
When in fact we put all of them through the same training, and that's because from one of the Stalker Sampson preliminary inquiries there was considerable focus on the training that LSU staff undertook. The training specifically around Article 2, Article 8 and their duties and responsibilities under the Coroners Act. So all of them will go through that training so that we can absolutely be certain that all are at the same skill level and knowledge around the law and then the practical application of the law. And so a bespoke course has been drawn up, and we now seek College of Police accreditation of that course in respect of responsibilities of researchers within the LSU. But we've made good progress, and the people that we've brought in are of high calibre, and I think that the recent results, particularly what I've just reported, illustrate that we're getting up to speed again quicker than perhaps we'd anticipated.
Just what's the total numbers at this point and anticipated?
Total numbers are 22 staff, 2 of whom are senior legal advisors. There's a further legal advisor and 2 paralegals, and then beyond that are disclosure manager and researchers then. And that's it at the moment. So in effect it's 2 teams who work on these materials.
Thank you. Right, we're going to move into the resourcing area. Jonathan, could I just ask a question?
Thank you, Chair. And Chief, I'm going to ask a question to Alistair here because it's his remit, but I want to wish Alistair all the best in his new future career, and I want to echo the comments of both the Chair and yourself around Alistair. I think he's done an exemplary job with both acting Deputy Chief Constable and the role and remit which he took over, which was a very difficult one around HR issues. And Alistair, it bears no reflection on you, but some of those difficult issues is what I'm going to try and discuss here this afternoon. And that is something you inherited, and I recognise that, and that's the whole issue of agency staff, how their contracts changed, and the complexity of that change, which has led to what seems, and I only say seems, to be payments still being made to agency staff even though they're no longer in the employment of the PSNI. Perhaps you could explain to us how that has occurred, or why that has occurred, and why that potentially has arisen, because we were all under the working assumption that agency staff, once their contract was terminated with the PSNI, were gone and payments ceased.
Thank you for that. Thank you for your kind remarks. We have paid no more to the contractor since the contract ended on the 31st of December. Any payments that are made since that period of time have been made by the contractor out of a fund that built up, that was designed to pay for redundancy at the end of the contract and similar events, which was contributed to throughout the lifetime of the contract as part of the structure of the Swedish derogation model of dealing with agency staff. So we haven't paid anything more since that. We paid throughout the period of time since 2011, since that model was adopted. We've paid into that suspense account. The supplier has settled all of the outstanding employer liabilities. We currently have due diligence in terms of accounting practice going on with the supplier and ourselves, and we anticipate the outstanding monies left in that fund will be returned to us, paid back to us, which was part of the contract terms, in the very near future. For reassurance, because I know this contract has caused members a fair amount of concern and curiosity, and I think it is the notion of moving from what was pure agency, i.e. the supplier had they supplied the individual, and there was no residual issues in relation to the customer, which would be us or the supplier. This changed that slightly, and we had recognised that with the supplier in the negotiations, which resulted in us having that contractual arrangement, that there would be an increased liability because they were now employees, not of us, but of the supplier, and they had suppliers, they had employers' liability. But because of the issues and concerns, we asked some time ago our internal audit function to review the whole process from the 2011 starting point. What was the cause of that? Which was the implementation of the Agency Workers Directive, and what were the options that were available to the service, how did we procure that, and then what have been the consequences of managing that contract through, and their assessment for value for money or lessons for the future, given that this was right at the beginning of this type of contract. That work is not complete. The auditors are still working at that. They will then report that to the Audit Risk Committee, and then we will bring that to the board to give you the full overview and give a sense of independent assurance around the whole process.
Joan, do you have a supplementary?
I would only add to that I think Alistair's quite right. There has been concern and curiosity about this, not least when a variation of a contract takes place halfway through, which requires contingencies to be put in place that, at least at face value, look like they are doing the opposite of what the Swedish derogation model was all about, which was to try and avoid the PSNI having to pay redundancy or inter-assignments. So while I fully appreciate there's a lot of detail there, and we welcome the fact that there's an internal audit and look forward to receiving that, because, you know, it's right and proper, I think, that we scrutinise that. Thank you.
I think the final report, when it comes, will give the story from beginning to end, and that will give the complete picture to members of the board, and you can form your own view after that. I think that's going to give you the richest picture.
Thank you. Brian?
Thank you, Chair. Chief Constable, this is sort of a supplementary type question in maybe 3 parts. And it relates to police effectiveness in what we understand now, of course, is the shrinking budget. And bearing in mind that previous Chief Constables, as the budgets began to shrink, applied a lot of electronic equipment, made it possible for police officers to spend more time out on patrol. So my first part of it is, following on obviously from the answers that you've given to some of my board colleagues and comments just made in your introduction, I would like you to tell us how you evaluate the effectiveness of the Locate initiative. Remember, that was equipment that was fitted in cars, and how you ensure that the public are receiving the maximum response from PSNI as a result of the use of Locate. Secondly, just briefly, how many vehicles are equipped with this equipment, and can you draw any comparisons at all in its effectiveness between police districts, how much it's used? And just finally, based on your assessment of the effectiveness of this initiative, do you intend equipping more vehicles with these units? Thank you, Chair.
Well, I'll ask Alan Todd to answer that question because it's a difficult one. There's a lot of detail. What I would want to say by way of an opening remark is you're absolutely right, Brian. Matt Baggett in particular brought a real emphasis in his leadership of this organisation to maximising our capability through the use of technology, and in his time as Chief Constable, there was significant investments that we're hopefully now starting to reap the benefits of as he has moved on. But Locate is one of those. The issue of BlackBerry devices and so on, so that officers can stay on the ground and stay out of police stations and record information and data rather than having to return to desktop computers and so on, is another. And there are other examples of investment in technology that has allowed us to keep visibility and reassurance at a higher level with a lower number of people. So you're quite right in the proposition of your question that as the budgets shrink, we need to be careful that we continue to leave the scope within the budget to invest in technology to allow us to become more efficient and more effective. But around all that difficult stuff to do with Locate, I'll pass you on to my colleague Alan Todd.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Brian. Just to clarify, Locate goes wider than vehicles. It tracks both officers through their pocket radios that they're on personal issue, and also the vehicles themselves. And to answer, probably out of order, but I'll try and hit most of the points for you, Brian. All the vehicles in the PSNI fleet, where that's appropriate, are fitted with this piece of equipment, and all radios likewise. If you take the program as being 3 broad parts, it's fitting the equipment, refining the software, and there's been 7 or 8 refinements as we've learned through it, and then exploiting the benefits which it provides us with as an organisation. And we're very much in phase 3 of that at the moment, having fitted it out in all our vehicles, equipped it with all our radios, upgraded the software to get stability, accuracy, and learn the lessons, and we're now getting the benefits, I believe, from that process. What it does allow very much in live time, and there are really 2 aspects to this. There's the live time use of the system, and there's the subsequent reporting use of the system, which provides us with a range of information which we can then use both for supervision and management of our business. In terms of vehicles, it will allow controllers to see where all the police resources are in a particular area at a particular time. Not only that, but it allows you, because of the way the system works, when a controller puts a cursor over that vehicle, it will see the officers who are in that vehicle, where they're attached to, and indeed, on many cases, what skills and courses they have. This is a very live time piece of allowing dispatchers and controllers to dispatch the correct people with the correct skills to a particular call for service as it fits at the time. And that allows us to move from what we call asking people to go to things to tasking the people to go to things, where we just are able to make those decisions in much faster time and much better meet requirements from communities across the country. As I said, it includes officer details even when they're outside vehicle and on foot patrol. They're still captured by the system because of the signal from the radio. And again, that information is similar. It allows us in fast time to replay the police response to an incident, to see where vehicles have come from and gone to, and where they subsequently are, which helps us manage our response to a range of circumstances. And it also allows us to work with communities across the country in setting what we call way markers for areas of concern. This allows us to talk to local communities, understand the concerns they may have about particular behaviour in a particular area at a particular time. We can then set up the system. If we make promises to local communities that we will pay attention to those areas and those issues at those times, to put that onto the system, and then look at both in live time and after the event, did we keep those promises, and share that information with various accountability structures, including our local PCSPs. So those are some of the live time pieces around that, but it also allows a tasking coordination centre to look at what the plan was for resource deployment today, and then look at it in live time and see if what the plan was is actually happening, and if not, why not? And if it isn't, change it, or if it isn't happening, understand why, and understand that that's the right thing to do. I mentioned in terms of reporting use, and there's a lot of reports come off the system and allow us to make judgments as an organisation. Part of that, and you touched on it, is about a shrinking organisation. One of the parts of the organisation that's shrinking is the vehicle fleet. From over 3,000 vehicles down to 2,700 is the target for this year. And Locate will be the central piece of information used to understand where those vehicles can be removed from the fleet, whilst minimising any operational capability impact of those significant fleet reductions. That allows us to take money out of fleet and protect our officers and staff numbers as an organisation and our operational capability. And I think that's a very strong evidence-based way on which to make what are difficult decisions. You asked the question, can we compare district to district? Yes, but more importantly, we can compare driver to driver and officer to officer and member of staff to member of staff. I'm currently looking at initial reports on about 4,000 users of police vehicles, how they drive, on a range of pieces. I'm not sure which page I appear on the report as yet in a rank from 1 to 4,000, but we will use this information going forward to understand where people are driving in appropriate circumstances and address that by way of training and where necessary discipline. So not only does it do district by district, but it does vehicle by vehicle and driver by driver, and we'll seek to exploit that in making sure that we're appropriate responses going forward. I've talked about the promise keeping, and the other piece around replaying incidents and understanding all of that information in its totality, which is a massive amount of information. It's a huge accountability tool inside and outside the organisation, and we have agreed protocols with a range of agencies, including the Office of Police Ombudsman from Northern Ireland, for the use of Locate in understanding police response to incidents afterwards, which is factual information which can quickly advance investigations where there are allegations about police conduct or police response to an incident. So across that range, I think we have fitted it all out. We've stabilised the system, got it to a place where we want in terms of software, and in terms of exploiting the benefits, we'll give you some flavour of the benefits it is delivering and will continue delivering in the future.
Thank you, Chief Constable and ACC Todd for that very fulsome answer. Thank you.
Thank you. We've now just got a couple of, I'm going to say odd questions, but they don't fit in with the theme. Well, I know that's the word. It's no offence to you, Katrina, because I would ask you to ask yours first, because it ties in with resourcing.
Okay.
It's about
as we move into International Women's Day, I wonder, would you like to comment on recent media reports in relation to lack of women applying, and also obviously lack of women in senior positions here, and also lack of Catholics applying, and the pattern view of policing was that it would be inclusive, diverse, and I wonder, would you like to identify what actions you're taking to deal with these adverse impacts on gender and political belief?
Yes, well, we want the organisation to be as diverse and as representative of the communities that we serve as possible. That's a commitment from me and from this team. You do make the obvious observation that as you look along this side of the table, we perhaps all fit one portfolio. I would respectfully pass back to the board the point that it is the board that has selected this team, not me.
Within a framework.
Well, absolutely, but it's up to all of us to work to make this team and indeed the entire organisation as representative as we possibly can. So there will be an opportunity, I guess, for you as a board and for me as a Chief Constable to encourage a rich pool of applicants from the cadre of appropriately qualified people across the UK to replace the vacancy created with Alistair's moving on. So that's one challenge that we can share collectively. On the broader piece around recruitment and some of the recent newspaper articles, there has been a significant amount of positive action work that has gone in to make the candidate pool as rich as possible, as diverse as possible, because we want the organisation to be representative. Alistair will be able to talk to some of the detail around that, but I would seek to reassure the entire board that there is no lack of commitment or enthusiasm from this executive team to do anything other than have this organisation as representative as it possibly can be. Two reasons for that. Well, there's probably more, but two that come to mind. One is it's the right thing to do, it's fair, it's what Patton envisaged. Secondly, and maybe overlapping with that a bit, there's also a very significant operational reason for that. If we are representative, if we are a diverse organisation, we will actually deliver better policing, we will understand communities and citizens better, and so at every level there's a complete commitment from this team to make the organisation at all levels as representative as we possibly can, and Alistair might want to give some detail around that.
Thank you, Chief Constable. The reports that you're referring to come from the media coverage of this document, which is the Equality Impact Assessment of our Workforce Plan. It's our document. The reports that are in it are us telling the wider world this is what it looks like, and asking, and we have consulted with the board on the shape of this before we went out with it, is asking for views on what we should be doing in the future relative to our assessment of where we are with the breakdown of the workforce. So there was articles in the newspaper drawing attention to that. It's on our website, and we are looking. It's gone out to the list of core respondents, and we are looking for input and views about how people think we can shape that. And those are things that we will then bring back to the board and probably to the Department of Justice in terms of any legislation requirement, in terms of how we move that forward. In terms of the issue of women in terms of recruits, there has been, or there continues to be, an issue that's attracting our attention in relation to the attrition rate of female candidates going through the physical competency assessment part of the recruitment process. We are putting a lot of work into the analysis of that, and we are bringing back options to the service executive to consider within the next 2 weeks. This will allow us to calibrate going forward, because we are virtually at the end of where we were with Campaign 1. Campaign 2 for the limited numbers that we might be able to take over the next year, depending on affordability, is to look to see if there's anything between those two that we can change, which may make an impact round about this. However, I would say that if the physical competency assessment is based on an occupational requirement, which we see it is, and in terms of we look at our sickness figures and the ill health and the injuries and such like, people need in policing to be of a certain physical competence. Physical competence test has been devised scientifically and rigorously tested and validated by academics to do that. There is an issue actually for much wider society in terms of the overall fitness of particularly young women. They are significantly less fit than young men, and that's with lifestyle choices and things they're doing, and this affects the pool of people which are attracted to policing. If we are looking to see whether this, where we've got this, the positioning of this and what we do with this, is having more of an impact, if there's things that we can do about it which allow maybe more people to come through that. But I remember history when we had this, doing this a different way, was actually we brought probably more female candidates into training and we lost them during training because they couldn't reach the fitness. The standard hasn't changed, where we've positioned that has. But that's currently under assessment. We are bringing forward suggestions to the Service Executive Board for the rest of the team in the next 2 weeks to consider that. It's an issue we're alive to, and it's an issue that we're asking people to give us a view on what the necessity in terms of the workforce makeup of the police service of Northern Ireland going forward. And we want to hear those views, and those views will inform us as to how best to construct things within the current employment law, or alternatively, look for differences.
Well, I welcome what I hear, but the proof of the pudding's in the eating. And you may or may not know, we've been just doing some work in Stormont on making politics, getting more women into politics, and that report is actually going to be coming out on Monday. But one of the things is there has to be a targeted gender action plan, and also in this case, because of your lack of people from the nationalist community, a targeted plan in relation to that. Otherwise, nothing will change. And I would strongly urge you to look at what the barriers are and change the barriers, so we're not just looking at a top team that come from one gender, one race, and probably one community. Thank you.
Just in brief response to that, because it will take time. If you look at the flow of people, the way policing operates, everybody joins as a trainee, as a constable, and you flow up through the ranks. And we've recently concluded the competition for appointment of inspectors, and we see in that something in the region of 30% of the successful candidates are female. We are beginning to see the draw through of more female as they were peppered through the organisation in earlier years, as they gain experience, and that will draw into the organisation in future years. But it's a debate, and it's something we engage with in the subcommittees on a frequent and regular basis, and want to do so.
Thank you.
So, Chair, there is a point here where we can work together on this, because I accept, and I'm not trying to abdicate the responsibility of this team to achieve a representative workforce, but it is actually in statute the responsibility of the Policing Board to deliver an effective, efficient, impartial, representative and accountable police service which will secure the confidence of the community. And I think there might be something that we could do collectively as we move into recruitment phases, either for chief officers in the near future, or indeed the small number of people that we are recruiting, to have the board coming in behind us, advocating for a representative service, encouraging people from underrepresented groups or minority groups to put themselves forward for a career in policing is something that we would welcome, and I actually think it would carry significantly more weight if it was coming from us jointly, that is the board and the service together, rather than us trying to do what we can and have been doing over the recent past.
Thank you. Bryce Dixon.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chief. Sadly, in recent weeks, there have been further examples of paramilitary-style attacks in the community, including against people under the age of 18. Bearing in mind your opening remarks about the importance of policing with the community, I wondered if you'd like to comment on how the budget cuts might affect policing with the community in relation to the prevention and detection of these paramilitary attacks. And secondly, is there a role which the the policing and community safety partnerships can play in this area, which perhaps they're not playing to the extent that they should at the moment. Thank you.
Well, Stephen Martin will perhaps answer some of the detail around this, but what I would say is remind members and the public what I said in my opening comments. We still have a very significant budget and resource available to us. The Deputy Chief Constable often challenges and reminds the senior executive team that even next year we're going to have £660 million of public money to spend. So all is not lost. Criminals should not rest easy, including those from paramilitary groups that brutalise young people and try to exercise a perverted form of justice in their mind on vulnerable people. We will, as the budget shrinks, prioritise our resources around vulnerability. We'll look at what threats, risks and harm are presented. We'll look at tackling vulnerability and vulnerable groups, and who more vulnerable than these young people, children under the age of 18, who are being brutalised by paramilitary thugs in these communities that often are suffering from inequalities and social deprivation as well. So this is right up there on our agenda. Stephen Martin perhaps could comment on some of the more recent cases and what we're doing about it.
Yes, well, thank you, Bryce. The board has taken a significant interest in this issue over recent months, and only last month I wrote to your members, Debbie Waters, with an extensive set of figures and statistics covering the recent periods with breakdown and around attribution and age profile. And that information is available to the board. I would simply endorse everything the Chief Constable said, but I would also say that policing with the community is the key to this. That is currently and will continue to be how we deliver policing, and we're absolutely committed to it. And today, right across Northern Ireland, we have officers working with local people, addressing local problems and coming up with local solutions. But as the name suggests, policing with the community requires so much more than simply the police. It is a partnership between us and the community, and no more so could that partnership be useful, in fact absolutely necessary, than in this issue of paramilitary assaults and shootings. They're a blight in our society. They've been with us for some time. They've never worked. They've been shown never to work, and they won't work now, and they won't work in the future. They are, as the Chief Constable says, a gross violation of human rights, without all the processes that we require and respect in a liberal democracy, where people are brutalised on the basis of often gossip and innuendo. But it's also worth noting that a criminal justice approach, whilst absolutely necessary and required, will never be sufficient on its own in dealing with this. This is as much a societal and a cultural issue as it is a criminal justice issue. And in that respect, I do think that the police and community safety partnerships, when they're reorganised and they come into effect again later on this year, do have an opportunity to work with the police and work with the communities to try and tackle this scourge and this issue that continues to unfortunately happen. And as you've said, unfortunately at times young people. It's appalling. So we would welcome working with the police and community safety partnerships, and everything the board can do to encourage that, we would welcome.
Jerry, Kelly, has a question?
Let me start off by wishing Alistair family and his family all the best for the future. The media may be quite delighted that some of our articles and programmes are driving some of the interest in the issues we're talking about today, but there was a spotlight programme on a few nights ago, and it's around assisting offenders. We have come through the process where I think it was the Stewart brothers in the first instance. This is a huge undertaking now. And if you watch the programme, but not just if you watch the programme, there is a worry about the credibility of the process that has taken this length of time to get here. So I suppose the question is, do you want to make comment on that? When do you think this is going to court? Is there a confidence in the top team that it is going to work? Because this is a huge test of this process.
Okay, Jerry, thank you for the question. I suppose part of the challenge that we have around this is that the subject of the Spotlight programme is about to enter into the final stages of the criminal justice process. There is likely to be some court proceedings out of this. The matters are with the Public Prosecution Service, and we're awaiting decisions around all of that. So that does limit us in what we can say. The Senior Investigating Officer, in my view, did a very good job within those legal parameters, that we don't move into the sub-judice space on the Spotlight programme on Tuesday night, but that does actually fetter us quite a bit of what we can say on that programme, and indeed in this public meeting of the Policing Court. That said, we want to be answerable, we want to give as much as we can. Drew Harris, Deputy Chief Constable, in his former role as the Assistant Chief Constable of Crime, has an intimate knowledge of this case, and I'll pass over him to say what he can, but it's within those parameters that these are matters that could well come before the court in the near future.
Well, the assistant offender in this case, Mr. Haggerty, Gary Haggerty, he has entered into a contract, in fact, an agreement with the prosecutor. It is a prosecution-led process, but before he can give evidence for the Crown against any defendant, he has to go through a trial process himself, and a trial process in respect of very serious criminality. And that process has begun in terms of attempts made to set a PE, a preliminary inquiry, for 2 instances of murder. And that matter will be heard again on the 11th of this month. So already these matters are before the courts, and in particular his criminality has to be put before the courts and proven and decided upon through the normal due process and rule of law. At that stage then, he's then, and if that is all successful, then for the PPS then to decide on the next steps around prosecution. But this is a prosecutor-led process. We have been diligent and determined in our investigations. It's been a huge investigation for us, and we are well used to big investigations, but this has been of a scale of its own. The programme itself set out that we've conducted almost 1,000 interviews with Mr. Haggerty, but a third of these were conducted for the Police Ombudsman, which we have no view of. We have no idea what evidence he has provided, what account he has provided to the Ombudsman, and these things are then for the Public Prosecution Service. And so for our part, we have conducted professional investigation into the allegations that Mr. Haggerty has made, crime investigations that he is making against others. So we are limited beyond that around the detail, and some of the detail will come out in due process. And I hope then people can be confident about the effort that's been put into this, and the effort over a long period of time. And even just the one issue that we can, I suppose, comment upon, as a result of losing agency staff on the 31st of December, we did lose 4 members of staff who have subsequently been replaced by by officers who have taken up their place on the investigation team.
I appreciate that, and appreciate the limitations you're under, but just as I have clear in my head, if Mr. Haggerty is he going through a single trial on all charges, or could this be a series of trials before we get to the point of that person over?
Well, the tactics for this are for the Public Prosecution Service, and I think there will be an initial trial, and then there are literally hundreds of offences, then will have to be viewed again by the Public Prosecution Service. So we actually can't preempt their decision-making process.
It just persists a little in this. Then, if it is a series of trials, a negative presumption was a question. Does that mean that the use of the assisting offender could be some considerable period away from other trials which he would be assisting in?
Yes, there could be still a very considerable amount of time to pass, months and years, before the individual could maybe, in effect, given crime evidence against other defendants.
Well, that concludes our questions for today, so I want to thank everyone